Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into some seriously strange history?
Always up for a good mystery.
Well, today we're going deep into Cold War Germany.
Ooh, sounds intense.
It is. We're talking UFO sightings in East Germany, but this isn't just like your typical alien stuff.
Oh. So what makes this case special?
Well, for starters, we've got the Stasi involved.
Oh, the Stasi, East Germany's secret police, notorious for their, well, everything.
Exactly. They were all about control and secrecy, and from your notes, it seems like you're really interested in how these events played into the overall tension and paranoia of the Cold War.
Absolutely. That Cold War context is key. Picture East Germany in the late 1970s, constant surveillance. Every little thing would have been magnified by that suspicion, right?
Right. So then you throw in reports of unexplained objects in the sky. I mean, if you're already worried about spies and potential invasions, and then bam, there are triangular crafts zipping around, it's got to make you wonder what's really going on.
It's like something out of a spy thriller.
Totally. And to make it even more unsettling, the East German government was totally silent about the whole thing. No investigations, no statements, nothing.
Classic government secrecy. We see this pattern time and again with unexplained phenomena. Roswell, these East German UFOs, it's like a default setting.
Yeah, like they think if they just ignore it, it'll go away.
Right. But of course, that just fuels the speculation and distrust, makes everyone even more paranoid.
Okay, so we've got a society on edge, strange sightings in the sky, and a government that's keeping quiet. Then you add in the Stasi. They were basically the eyes and ears of the regime, always watching, always listening.
And their involvement in this UFO mystery, well, it makes it even creepier. These were people trained to sniff out any threat, and suddenly they're dealing with something they can't explain, something that challenges their whole worldview.
I can only imagine what went through their minds. Did they try to debunk it all? Cover it up even more?
Well, from what we see in the sources, they definitely didn't ignore it. There are accounts from former Stasi agents and defectors that suggest they were actively trying to suppress information about these sightings. It's like they were trying to control reality itself.
It's chilling to think about. Like a real-life X-Files episode playing out behind the Iron Curtain. So do we have any idea why they were so obsessed with these sightings? Was it all about maintaining control, or did they genuinely believe something bigger was happening?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think it's safe to say that they saw these UFO sightings as a potential threat. Remember, East Germany was facing growing internal dissent at the time. Anything unusual, anything they couldn't explain, could be seen as a sign of weakness.
So basically, they were more concerned about the optics of the whole thing than they were about finding out what those UFOs really were.
Exactly. They didn't want people questioning their authority or their grip on reality.
And if anyone dared to speak out.
Oh, the Stasi had ways of dealing with that. Witnesses, especially those in the military, were often met with threats if they tried to report what they'd seen.
Wow. It's like they were trying to create a world where these UFOs just didn't exist, even if hundreds of people had seen them. So we've got a lot to unpack here. Unexplained sightings, a government shrouded in secrecy, and the Stasi lurking in the shadows. Where do we even begin?
Well, before we get too deep into the Stasi's involvement, let's take a closer look at those sightings themselves. What were people actually seeing? Were they just lights in the sky, or was there more to it?
You're right. Let's dive into those details. What exactly were those East Germans witnessing in the skies?
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. We're not just talking about blurry lights or distant objects.
Hmm.
People were describing some pretty remarkable stuff.
Like what? Give us the good stuff.
Well, there were multiple reports of disc-shaped objects, classic flying saucer stuff. But it's not just the shape, it's the movements. Think sudden 90-degree turns at incredible speeds.
Great, and that's just showing off.
Right, and some pilots even reported seeing objects moving faster than anything they'd ever encountered.
So we're not just talking about your average weather balloon or misidentified aircraft.
Definitely not. And it wasn't just a handful of reports either. This was happening over several years, and the witnesses included military personnel, police officers, credible people.
That's pretty compelling. So you have all these credible witnesses reporting these incredible things, and the government is just silent.
Well, remember, this is the Cold War. Any unexplained phenomenon could be seen as a potential weapon or a sign of the enemy's technological advancement.
I can see how that would add to the paranoia. Okay, so we've got these strange sightings, a silent government. But what about the people? Did they just accept what they were being told, or did they try to find out the truth for themselves?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive because despite the government's efforts, people were talking. They were sharing their stories, speculating, and some were even actively trying to investigate these sightings themselves.
Okay, so it sounds like the East German UFO mystery is about to get even more intriguing.
It's amazing to think about those East Germans. They were living in this society where information was tightly controlled, right? But they weren't just passively accepting what they were told about these UFOs.
I guess some things are just too strange to ignore. So how did they go about investigating these sightings? Did they form like secret UFO hunting clubs or something?
Well, not exactly clubs, but something kind of similar did happen. While the official channels remained closed off, unofficial networks started popping up. Scientists, researchers, even some journalists, they started digging deeper, trying to piece together the puzzle of what was happening in their skies.
It's like a real-life X-Files, but without Mulder and Scully. So did these unofficial investigations turn up anything interesting? I mean, did they manage to uncover any information the Stasi had tried to bury?
They did. And it added a whole other layer to the mystery. Remember how we talked about the Stasi meticulously documenting, well, everything? Well, some of those documents started to leak out, hinting at the scope of their investigations.
Okay, so now we've got leaks, unofficial investigations, and a whole bunch of unanswered questions. I bet those leaks really got people talking. What kind of information was coming out? Was it enough to force the government's hand?
It wasn't enough to force a full disclosure or anything like that, but it did change the game. The leaks revealed that the Stasi was taking these sightings far more seriously than they were letting on. They weren't just dismissing them as, I don't know, weather balloons or
They
hallucinations.
actually thought something real was happening.
It seems that way. They
Yeah.
were analyzing radar data, interviewing witnesses, and they were even investigating potential landing sites.
Wow. So while publicly they were maintaining this wall of silence, behind the scenes they were treating it like a genuine phenomenon.
Yeah.
Did those leaks lead to any breakthroughs in the investigation? Did they get any closer to figuring out what those UFOs were?
It's too bad. But no, they didn't. Those leaks gave some valuable insight into what the Stasi was doing, but they didn't solve the mystery of what was happening. If anything, they raised even more questions.
Like what?
Like, what were the Stasi really worried about? What did they actually find out?
Okay, so we've got more pieces to the puzzle, but we still can't quite see the full picture. I imagine those unanswered questions must have been maddening for people at the time, especially those who'd seen these things with their own eyes. Did the sightings themselves continue throughout this period? Was there any change in the frequency or the nature of the reports?
Well, that's one of the most interesting aspects of this whole story. The East German UFO mystery didn't just continue, it escalated.
Escalated. How so?
Well, the focus shifted from individual sightings to a wave of mass sightings, particularly in the late 1980s.
Mass sightings. Okay, how many people are we talking about?
Hundreds in different locations, all reporting seeing strange lights and formations.
So suddenly, it's not just whispers and rumors. It's something that huge groups of people are experiencing together. Did these mass sightings finally force the East German government to acknowledge what was happening?
Not quite. Even though these mass sightings were harder to dismiss, the official response remained mostly unchanged: silence and denial.
So they just stuck their heads in the sand.
Pretty much. But behind the scenes, there's evidence that the government, and especially the Stasi, were becoming increasingly concerned.
It makes sense, right? They'd built their power on control and secrecy, and suddenly hundreds of citizens are witnessing something they can't explain or control.
Exactly. And the Stasi began to view these mass sightings as something that could lead to social unrest. They were afraid people might start to see the government as incompetent, or worse, as hiding something really important.
So their main concern was still about maintaining their grip on power, not about what these sightings might actually mean.
It seems so. And the Stasi changed their approach a little, but their goal remained the same: control. They increased surveillance on anyone who talked about the sightings.
So even with more people witnessing these things, the government doubled down on its efforts to control the narrative. Did that work? Did they manage to stop people from talking about the UFOs?
You know what? That's where things start to unravel for them. The Stasi might have been effective at silencing some people, but those mass sightings had a huge impact on the public. People were becoming more and more skeptical of the government's denials.
People knew what they'd seen, and the more the government tried to deny it, the more suspicious they became.
Precisely. And that suspicion and growing distrust played a role in the events that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany. It's amazing how something as, well, out there as UFOs became intertwined with real-world politics.
It makes you realize that even things that seem insignificant can have ripple effects. Sometimes those ripples can change the course of history.
Exactly. So we've gone from those early sightings and the Stasi's attempts at control to mass sightings and growing public distrust. It's a story that shows how even the most secretive regimes can't completely control the narrative when people start seeing things they can't explain.
Wow. So what happened when the wall came down? Did all those secrets about the East German UFO mystery finally come out?
You know, that is a fantastic question. The fall of the Berlin Wall didn't just change the political landscape. It also opened up a ton of secrets, including those about the UFO mystery.
Okay, so the wall comes down and all those Stasi secrets are just out there for anyone to see. I bet people were rushing to get their hands on those UFO files.
Oh, absolutely. It was like this huge moment of truth. Everyone wanted to see what had been hidden for all those years.
So did they find what they were looking for? Was it all there in those files? Proof of alien contact, government cover-ups, the whole 9 yards?
Well, not quite. It would be amazing if it was that easy. But remember, those Stasi archives were massive and totally disorganized. Millions and millions of pages of reports and surveillance logs.
So no neat little folder labeled UFO secrets.
No. It took a lot of time and effort just to sort through it all, and even then, there was no guarantee they'd find any real answers.
Okay, so it wasn't a simple treasure hunt. What about the stuff they did find? Did it shed any light on the mystery?
Well, it did confirm that the East German government was taking those UFO sightings way more seriously than they ever admitted. Remember those leaks we talked about? Those were just a tiny part of it. The archives showed a much bigger effort to investigate and control information about those sightings.
So they were really trying to keep a lid on things. Did they come to any conclusions about what those UFOs might be?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The files didn't have a clear answer, but they did offer some interesting clues. They looked at a bunch of theories.
Like what?
Well, everything from some kind of secret Soviet technology to, misidentified weather events.
You have to wonder what those Stasi agents really thought about it all. I mean, were they ever freaked out? Did they start believing in aliens?
That's a great question. Most of the files just focus on the investigation itself. But sometimes you do see hints that they were struggling to make sense of it all. Remember, these were people trained to see everything in a very specific way. Enemy versus ally, black and white. Then they encounter this totally unexplainable phenomenon.
It must have been a real mind bender for them. Okay, so the files don't solve the mystery, but they do show how seriously the government was taking it. What about those witnesses who came forward? We know some of them were threatened. Did anything worse happen to them?
Well, some people were definitely pressured into silence, but the files actually reveal a more complex picture. The Stasi wasn't just interested in suppressing information about UFOs, they also wanted to use it.
Use it? How do you mean?
They saw these sightings as a chance to spread disinformation and create confusion. It was like a new weapon in the Cold War.
So not only were they trying to keep things quiet, they were actively trying to manipulate the whole UFO thing for their own purposes.
Exactly. It's a pretty wild twist, right?
Definitely. So even with all this new info from the Stasi files, the central question remains. What were those UFOs? And I guess it's a question that might never be fully answered.
That's true, but, the fact that we're still talking about it all these years later shows just how powerful those mysteries can be.
Absolutely. It captures our imagination and makes us wonder about what else might be out there.
I think that's a great point. The East German UFO mystery isn't just about strange lights in the sky. It's about government secrecy, about our desire to understand the unknown. It makes us think about what we believe and why.
Well said. It's been a really amazing journey exploring this bizarre and fascinating chapter of history.
I totally agree. And even though the Cold War is long gone, the themes we've talked about today are still relevant. We're still grappling with government secrecy, still trying to make sense of things we don't understand.
That's so true. It's a great reminder to always be curious and to never stop questioning the world around us. And who knows, maybe someday we'll finally uncover the truth about those East German UFOs.
Or maybe the mystery is part of what makes it so compelling. Either way, it's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
Likewise. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Cold War UFOs. Until next time, stay curious.